Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Creative Mornings number 102. Creative Mornings is a breakfast lecture series based out of Bangalore. Although it was started in New York, and we started the first chapter in the country in 2013, we, as in Teapoy, which is a media production house, we make documentary films, of which I'm part. This is the organizing team, and then we have volunteers every month as well. We can't run Creative Mornings without our local partners, which today we have Vimor, which is our resource partner, which of course we'll talk more about. And Samagata, the space we are in, supports ventures like ours, which has to do with art and culture in general. Kiru is the snack that you saw in those obscure aluminum packets. Please try them if you haven't already. They are all millet and homegrown, because the founder who runs it also has, by the way, given a talk at Creative Mornings a year back. But you'll know about how their homegrown product is based or was started in order to support communities where he comes from, which is Malwali. So it has a lot to do with what today's talk is also about, which is why I'm telling you. And Mud Fingers, which adds a little bit of green into every talk that we do. We have all of our talks that get uploaded onto the Creative Mornings YouTube page, so you are free to take them, take a look at them. It's a free repository. We have a global partner, actually, which helps the headquarters give us what we need on a monthly basis to run Creative Mornings smoothly, because a lot of people ask us, what is your business model? Thankfully, our headquarters has one, although we don't. And today, our volunteer Priya is here. Every month, we have volunteers who help us run the show. So thank you. And of course, not to mention our constant volunteers, Yogesh and William, who are always helping us run the show in the background. You can tag us so that all of our posts about today are up on the same social media handle. This was last month's talk, which was themed as Crossroads, and we had an NGO founder, Davidson, who came down and spoke about the relief work that his otherwise women-oriented work that his NGO is meant to do at Manipur. So likewise, this month's theme happens to be revival, and we actually got multiple inputs that led us to Pavitra ma'am. I'm going to just elaborate a little on this, because months in making, people have told us you must have Pavitra ma'am. And this is something we haven't told you, but a lot of people, speakers from earlier talks, have also mentioned how it's very important. And of course, Soumya, who's here, who is part of Takshashila Institution, just in the same building, finally put us in touch with ma'am, and we immediately ran to see this textile museum, which we did not know even existed in our city. So the very first, introduction we had was of awe and a lot of shame, because we think we know our city and we had no idea that such an establishment exists, which is why we invited Pavitra Mudaya to join us today. I think what I take away from that first conversation we had with her was our definition of the word originality and what it means to be original. Because in her world, the words revival, original, and originality, preservation have very different meanings after 50 plus years of working with the artisans across the country, where she really looks at how borders are not defined by borders as such, and their work is not rooted in geographical context alone, which is why her work with supporting artisans, as well as preserving old traditional motifs and other patterns of saris, which you will, of course, have seen displayed, but she will go into detail about, is what has been the focus of her work. Something that started in 1974 by her mother and her is 50 plus years, in the making. And so, I'm going to cut short now, and very, very happy to welcome Pavitra ma'am to share her journey with us.
Thank you. Thanks. Good morning. Nice to see all of you. I'm happy to be here and share my little knowledge of 50 years of reviving and recreating textiles, which a very great emphasis on having livelihood with dignity. That is the core of what draws me to it. And I think from there I'll begin. So how did we begin Vimor? How did we begin Vimor? That was in 1974. I lost my dad. I was all of just 16. But so we were left high and dry. We needed to support ourselves. And the only thing my mother knew was textile and handicrafts, because she was the first manager of Kaveri Arts and Crafts back in 1958. Okay, that is at a time when women never came to work only, but she came to support my dad. Then she was sent to New York World's Fair by Mrs. Pupil Jaika. I think that was a stroke of luck, and she did extremely well in New York World's Fair, 64. called her back in 65. The state government said, Vansati America hogide in Kalsala. So my father was livid and he said, just throw up the government job and go. I mean, this is something unheard of, but my dad was very progressive. He said, don't be like other women and say husband and child is an excuse. And I was an only child. So she went back 65 after resigning. Then again, 67, she was sent to Montreal. Each time the fair was for 6 months, 7 months. And I think that exposure was fabulous because at that time selling a textile or a sari in US was something very difficult because there were not many Indians who had moved there at that time. So, I mean, this was a fallback off, and Mrs. Jaika had opened her a ticket saying, where in the world do you want to settle? And you can open these Indian boutiques and stores. She said, I can't be a second-class citizen, and promptly was back. But when my dad passed away and we had to do something, the first thing was to think of we registered a firm called Vimor. Vimor means my name, Pavitra Pure, in Indonesian. She had met this girl in America. So we registered and began. I think the great luck for us was having Mr. Jaikar and then meeting a man, Mr. Bandari, who was a trader who would collect all temple saris. Temple saris are saris that are donated to a temple for a wish fulfilled. So normally you gave saris or gold or silver depending on your status. And if you look closely, there will be a name of the donor written there. And that would be tied in a bundle and auctioned, and this man happened to find us and brought it to us. So the good pieces were sent to Mrs. Jaika, took it for Calico Museum. So it opened the doors for Calico Museum, Gira Sarabhai, and that was such a blessing. The rest was sold in Cottage Industries in Delhi. So that set the tone for us. So we were assured of an income because these places were taking our saris. But post that, in 2 years, we realized that what was coming by way of design, there was a deterioration of what that aesthetics was. So slowly, with whatever funds we did, we started the puja sari, that is the red sari, in Dharmavaram. See, Dharmavaram is a big weaving center, and so we did our first thing in Dharmavaram. And from there, I mean, I don't want to get into all the other stories of it, and then it went on to other things. Today, I'd like to talk about the puja sari simply because this is one of my biggest successes. This has been in production continuously for 48 years, different versions. And you'd be shocked there was no branding, no name, nothing. So how did we do it? So I'd look at the design and I'll think, how can I match what the weaver's skill is? And we redid it. But of course, being a creative person, you'll always want to itch and do something different always. You don't want to do the exact same thing. And that is how we continued doing it. The puja, I did kasuti on it. So we realized the two communities could benefit. So our way of working is we give you an advance and a buyback. So if it was 20 saris as a minimum or 12 in those days, we would give you an advance and a buyback. So this man could work in a risk-free environment. I think that was one of our reasons that we succeeded, because he did not have to figure out where to sell, who to go to, which shop will buy it. I mean, since it was tested, and so we sold it at Vimor for a year or two, depending on us. After that, I would give the design to him free and say, go ahead and grow. So, they were grateful because it was already tested at Vimor. We had a certain name at that time. And they could continue producing it. But when I taught more than 12 different people, more than that, 15. I would tell them that if you are asking for a sari, how do you customize it to you? So it did not restrict you that just do the same thing as is. So you could customize it for you, you could customize for you. So as a variety developed, also it was also the buying points, the consumer, the wearer. You didn't have a big budget, do something else. So I would always teach in a way that could be replicated, which allowed them to grow. So now when I look back, all of them have grown beyond me, and my biggest successes, and 70% of them can buy me out, and I'm training the second or third generation without knowing two buttons of a computer. Okay, that is another thing. But the joke is, everyone says it's put so much food on our plate. See, now when I look back, that is the essence. Whichever job you do, why do we all work to sustain ourselves? If you can sustain it without having to put out your hand or beg anybody, I think it's a great thing, because you've kept his self-respect, his confidence. And that is a starting point I've always done with design, is building confidence and pride. Because it's not possible to say, oh, you had this legacy, or you should feel proud. How can you feel proud when you're worried where to feed your wife and children? See, these are things that in marketing everyone says have to do, must do, all the points, all the statistics. We've never looked at statistics as such. But I look at one sari for so many years, impacts each time a sari is done, a set of 4 saris, impacts 12 to 15 people. So if it is 40 odd plus 50 years, that you can multiply. I'm not going to keep a track on saying how many people, because I don't own that. So the ownership was never with me. To give you a little way of why I say revival doesn't need to be the same thing that has to be continued. You keep the major aesthetic of it, understand. But you don't need everything to be in the same way, because times have changed. What could have taken 1 month to do, today he doesn't have that much time. So you need to change things with time so that it's adaptable. At the same time, you can't lose your aesthetics. And I think the same time, it's very necessary to understand it's our shared legacy. As I say, every Indian owns every textile. It's not the elitists who were the rich people who said, I can have the most fantastic thing. And so the puja is an example of how it could go to anybody. So when I mean anybody, the same sari has been done, like the last line of the bird is not how it was. But you have to allow that little space and allow that change, because change is the only constant, but it has to go. If it goes with the aesthetics, you can't be so sticky and say, why did you do that? And who was I to actually hold everyone responsible to say that this is the only way? No. So we let it be. It was there in cotton. So the cotton sari I'm wearing, strangely, this is about 45 years old. And the original ikat, to talk about it, has ikat, the last sari. I didn't bring the originals. Come to the museum sometime, you'll see the originals. So would any of you guess that there were ikats in Karnataka? No. We think it's only Orissa and Pochampally or Andhra or Patan. Who would dream Karnataka there, but there was. So when I was looking, and I was just fascinated with the sari, and when I said, how can I redo it? But nobody had the skills to do that small chukki, what we call that dot in Karnataka. So I said, let me substitute. How did I substitute? I substitute with the dotted line. So it was a dotted line, you'll see it in silk. So, you have to worry about wearing a sari. You can't have loose threads. It will catch in your bangle, in your ring. So you have to take everything. It's not just about what looks beautiful outside. You have to think of the technical things. And I didn't come from a technical background at all. I studied law. Because Mr. Jaikar insisted, I went to Weaver Service Center for 2 months, and that was like an observer training. It was fabulous because all the world, India's fabulous artists were there. You were like a peon, give me the paint, tie up that knot, something. But I think you just learned on the job. Then I learned from my weavers, which I reteach to them in a simplified version. So when I did this dotted line, this cotton man said, impossible, I'm not doing it. He was one Mr. Varadarajan. They have a business called GV Saris, and his son does extremely well. Fought with me. He said, I can't do this. I said, take a single thread. This is a single thread. So, and he couldn't, there are 2 systems today, is the Jacquard and the Derby. He said, I can't do that. So it left me with no choice of what to do. This man is saying no to everything. So, but I wanted to do it at whichever cost. And in my head, I'd already decided this is what I wanted to do. So I did a dotted line, which normally weavers will never work with a single line. I changed the border. That is actually how the puja border is. He couldn't do that. Again, it's dots and dashes. This was also lines. So everything is very different from what was, but this has come to stay. Then this Palu interested me because it has a Manipuri motive. See, we are so caught up thinking this is mine, this is my area, my state. There were no borders earlier, and if you do look at textiles, there was so much sharing, integration, assimilation to make it your own. And everyone's brain was differently wired. So, what is our fear? I don't understand why we are just so bringing in this issue and finding reasons to fight and have conflict. Because actually, Manipur is in one part of India, this is in South. How did we assimilate, trade, migrations, different reasons? So, if that is your line, you've seen something. Now, I look at it artistically. If I've seen something, it'll be in my head. I can recreate it in my own version. There is no yes and no or do and don't on it. So I realized today we are unnecessarily building so many barriers that is not necessary. Ultimately, we have such a large population that needs a livelihood. As I say, not any livelihood with dignity. And handlooms offers that dignity because you don't have distress migration. We are the only sector that can take care of 9 SDG goals without any issue. We can stretch to 11 if it's possible. We can. And when we have a time-tested model, we are just chasing everything mechanical that it's upsetting and it's sad. And no other country in the world can match us. It'll take another 100 years before they even learn 5 of our techniques. And here we've got it in every corner of the country. And also this also comes in, I think, with how we've industrialized getting everything just out of a machine. So we want it quick, we want everything to be immediate. Whereas a sari like this, if it lasts for 45 years, you talk of slow consumption, it fits the bill. It is something that you will value because every time a man weaves a sari, he prays and weaves. So it comes with blessing, it comes with good wishes. It doesn't come out of a soulless machine. So these are kind of things that I hope and wish that slowly we can understand the reasons, We don't need to buy those 10 saris, we buy 2 saris that can last for so long. But the beauty of the sari being unstitched is you can style it differently throughout the 10, 20 years you wear it. Now she styled it differently, I styled it differently. So the idea is you can celebrate your individuality, you can celebrate it and celebrate where you live, climatic, social reasons for whatever. So there's no reason of saying, I need something and tomorrow I'm throwing it into the landfill. This is in handlooms, we've never had to use all this, we use natural fiber. Any natural fiber could be done. So just to give you a little backstory, what do you think the first fiber was used to make the first sari fabric? No, it is the lotus stem. Okay, the lotus stem. And why the lotus stem? See, in India, lotus is a major thing because of the philosophy of it. So there was, when people were wearing leaves and bark, there have been little stories all across the country who have different stories. I'm talking of one in the south. So they prayed to Shiva and said, clothe us. So he said, I will create some kind of a machine to do this, but on one promise. You promise that what comes out of what I give you should be as beautiful as Mother Parvati. So the weaver gave the promise saying whatever cloth we do will be as beautiful. I think that is the reason that they really create exotic things in our country, especially if you look at the older pieces, they are exotic because of that promise to Shiva. So Shiva, they call Jineshwara. And he brought out a small god. Shiva brought out this god called Jineshwara from the back of his tongue. Don't ask me how it's come about, but these are the stories. And he gave him that minor god brought out the 7 colors of the rainbow. So you have the colors, you have everything together. They set out the loom with different parts, assembled it. Again,
The looms were always used with everything that was reused. So it was the rafters of the house that was coming apart, they used it for the looms. The reeds were with jawhar stems. It was never that we needed to go and buy. And if you wove with the jawhar stem, the sari would last because there was no friction. Today we use steel. So that constant friction, weakens the kind of thing. It's unnecessary. But of course, today we've lost that generation of people who do all this. And you'll be surprised that the shuttle that is used for the loom was made out of dead buffalo horns. So everything was a reuse. What you today talk on sustainability, everything is there, every aspect of it. And jari was never rolled on anything hard because it would crack. So they used old fabric, old saris, wrapped up sari on it. So because it was very precious, it will cut otherwise. But these are the ways, if you look at every system, everything was tied up with something that was a living entity. So why was lotus stem used? Because the idea is live your life like the lotus in muddy waters, in the messy life of what we live, but it's untouched. So neither the flower or the leaf gets touched by all the muck. That is how to live your life. Look up, aspire and move up. That was the reason that lotus was used in such a big way. And that came to be, now it's the most prized thing in Thailand. They call it lotus silk. Okay, we have it here. I have one of my weavers who's got the Guinness Book for Natural Fiber, and he's done it. I mean, I just trained him with some design, and it's just fantastic. All my weavers, I have another story that they've reached heights that is something fabulous, So, talking of Janeshwara and the fiber we finished with, what do you think? Why do you think the sari was there for so long? It was the adaptability. So again, in a sari, you'll never see anything wasted. Okay, from sari, when it tears, they use it as a hammock. Have you ever thought that in India we've never had crib deaths? Why don't we have crib deaths in India? Because in that hammock, the child moves, the cloth moves, and it feels that mother's or grandmother's love. So, there are so many beautiful things that we have never realized about it. So when the sari is torn, they use it in different ways to make a kaudi, a blanket, and nappies and things like that. But the last bit of the sari, the thread is reused to do embroidery. Earlier, the kasuti work that we knew in Karnataka or maybe all over India, they used the leftover end beyond the tassels of those saris, or when it's thread where those threads were used to do embroidery. Nothing was ever waste. So this is a kind of a reason. Another 1 minute, I'm going to talk about the colors. Why do you think we have so many colors in our country? So every day in India, we have the Navagraha, the planetary systems. So each god has a particular color that is his favorite color. So it's that day, you will wear a yellow if it was for Guru. You will wear it if it is black for Shani. So each day you wore a different color. So that is why India is a beautiful, colorful country, and we're not stuck with those black, browns, and grays. I think that is it. So his favorite color is also given, and now we know color therapy is great, aromatherapy, everything is intertwined with the textiles. So the depth of it is something unbelievable. Also, I'd like to just bring it to your light that all of you have known about Kabir and his famous things. But in every area of textiles, you have a saint who was a weaver, a poet and a philosopher who was always a weaver. All of you would have heard of Tirukural, the Kural. He too was a weaver. Here in Karnataka, we have this Devara Dasamaya. He's done fabulous work. They write just two couplets. Basavana, he was a precursor to him. All of them, Devara Dasamaya, all these people were only poets. And Sarojini Naidu has written a fabulous poet named The Weaver also. So what was it about weaving that drew everyone to it? One is all of us from the time we are born till the day we die, it is cloth that accompanies you. And cloth was only handloom, you should remember, before machines came. So we have a very close connection with this touch and feel, and all of us have great memories hiding behind your mother's or grandmother's sari or whatever it is. So it plays a very important part other than just clothing you. It is also about, like they say, this is the two eyes of society, the farmer and the weaver. They're the two eyes of society. You need both, one to feed you, one to clothe you. Of course, today we still need the farmer, but we don't need the weaver, and that is our tragedy because we've not been able to respect that. And technology has moved to such a point that they're able to duplicate any handloom in the power loom. And we are unable to be educated to understand the difference. Of course, in a huge population like this, it's very difficult to come to it. So, though we have great rules in all the rules are put, all the proposals have great do's and don'ts and regulations and rules. It's not possible to implement everything because I guess where can you implement it when a lot of people are unlettered? The weavers are unlettered, but they're brilliant. They're actually pure mathematics and scientists, actually. But because we've kept them unlettered, they're unable to tell you that what they are doing is climate friendly. We spend crores on talking on climate change and sustainability. But these people, they do not know that processes are climate friendly. They don't use machines, they don't use chemicals. What more do we ask? But yet we spend crores on saying, how do we achieve sustainability? I always say, they put me on quite a few panels, and I was on a UNEP. I said, we have solutions in our backyard, but it's our fault if we've kept them all unlettered. So it's society's problem that we've created a situation that we have this brilliant man who cannot talk about something that's relevant and that is ruining our life on earth because we chose not to keep him lettered. He doesn't know to talk English, he doesn't wear pant and suit and comes. But he's fabulous and his genius is beyond description because without knowing maths, he's able to figure out which stone weighs what, how it balances everything. How is it possible? And it might interest you to know Charles Babbage, who did the computer. He was inspired by the jacquard looms done in Lyon. Today, the whole world uses jacquard looms, even in India. But that was it. He saw the binary system of that, and weaving is exactly this. And before the computer came, we had something called the adai and the jala. Exactly the same thing. But, the sad thing is the loss of knowledge is so much. And that is it. The second thing I just like to tell you is this puja is something we've had a great impact for. The other thing that I take pride is what is today you all call Chettinad and things like that. See, we were not smart enough to know how to name what to name. But we did this, okay? And I think every woman has a sari like this, okay? So this was simple enough and this did not need that core white. I just took off that attached border and it is here. Anyone who came from a difficult situation, I said, do this as a sari. So this has been widely worn by Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay, who is very closely connected with me and my mother. When I was young, I used to think, God, these old women coming are a nuisance because they would be so fastidious, But Kamala Devi was unbelievable because she would sit with me and insist any new sari had to be kept aside to show it to her. Either we go to her house in Indranagar, she'd always come. So between Pupil and Kamala, it was fabulous for us. At that time, I used to think, God, these people are so fastidious, being so old. Does it make a difference, one shade of mustard or the check not being all right? But they were so fastidious. And one thing that has lived with me is when I did a sari and I showed it to her and she said, why are you looking unhappy about it? I said, yeah, you told me to do something and I wanted a certain loom and a weaver and you didn't agree, and so this is not. So because of you, this is not okay. So she just looked at me sternly and she said, I don't want excuses. And I was so upset. My mother didn't support me, say anything. I put in a lot of effort. So now my standard line to my weaver is, I don't want excuses, thinking of her. But she was amazing. She also paid me the highest compliment, I think, which is very precious to me. Later, when I was upset, sometimes she sat me down and she said, if I didn't believe that you had the capacity, I wouldn't be so harsh on you. I think I'm privileged because at that time I didn't realize what all she had done. I mean, I knew she was somebody big, but to look at it now, since I'm in this sector, I really value it. And it was just unbelievable, you know. She said, because I feel you have the capacity, I'm so harsh and I'm asking you to check out things, you know. But anyway, so that was the thing. The other thing I'd like to also say is not to sound boastful, as I said, from the president down to everyone has got my saris, and we have a small store, just 10 by 12. We've never advertised for 50 years. So anyone doing marketing can question how it happened. But I believe it's a lot of goodwill. All my weavers pray for me. They send me the prasad, the tavis, wherever it is, you know, that kind of human goodness has come through. And I think that is what has allowed me to be here so much. We've never said no to any weaver coming. We've done a lot of work in Rajasthan without knowing a word of Hindi. She's wearing a sari that I did in Pokhran. Shweta's wearing one now. Just stand up. It's a simple thing. And I did not know Hindi, and I developed all these things in Pokhran. So I think by God's grace, wherever I've done design, it has had a commercial value and it's had great success. So I think, so this sari, coming back to it, I did the Indira Gandhi Centenary collection 2017. I was the only one called to do it. And this sari of mine came back. They put it on the table. I mean, her friends put it out because Malvika Singh got the saris from Mrs. Gandhi and they put it out on the table. Out of the 15, I said, I won't do one. But out of the 14, 7 saris were from us. Not necessarily bought in my store, but something that I developed. So it is something like this. If this can do its round for so long and have such an iconic woman wearing it, that's what I tell my weavers, it's the potential, you know. If you do something with great aesthetics, it has its own selling journey. We do not need to put crores into, say, market it that way, put it that way. People will disagree with me, but because handloom is a slow process, we can't churn out 100. For the small level that's coming, we surely have a sale. And I think that kind of thing continues. And today the great joy is the youngsters today, a lot of them I'm seeing, is they are all celebrating their Indianness. They're looking at a deeper reason for Indian textiles or for anything Indian and looking at the value. So that's the great hope for our country, that it's all in their hands. I think I should stop. Thank you. If there's anything, you can ask me anything. If it's lasted for 3,000 years, I mean, may not all the 1.2 or 1.4 billion won't wear handlooms for sure. Everyone will buy a polyester powerloom because it's cheaper. But I think that the level of, it's been there for so long, and the sari is the only unstitched garment that has had a continued usage. Every other country's national dress is just an occasion wear. In India, a sari is a daily wear. So if it has been there for XY reasons, because sometimes you can comprehend it or you can't comprehend, it definitely will be there. See, people have fought Jhansi of Rani, all the wars they fought in saris. So style it how you want, but just wear a handloom. You don't need to wear it the way we wear it. See, our generation is different. So it's totally okay, no? So how is it the unstitched garment has gone on, and it surely will be there. If nothing else, just hang it on your wall and appreciate it. There are things always you could do.
It's such a pleasure to see you, ma'am.
Right, sir.
First things, I'm a lawyer. I studied law by default. And there's one more commonality. I started my life selling saris. Because I was born here in Bangalore, and my grandfather used to have a silk showroom in Chickpet. And I learned colors from him: Ananda, Ramar, temple border, and peacock border. So it's my father had a brand called Sumangli. We did a lot of life selling saris.
Commercial street?
Yeah. No. We were from Tamil Nadu.
Okay.
So we source sarees, like you said, we used to give order for a year ahead from the handloom village, from Pochampalli to Onnapuram to Kanchipuram, Dharmavaram. So it's such such a wonderful thing to go down that lane. Uh, Truly appreciate what you've been doing, ma'am. But my question is, how do you see reviving the art of sari? Today, it is no more what you and I could relate a sari to be. It is so long back when Surat came in and other industries came in. The sari's definition per se has changed from what it used to be, how culturally you're seeing it, in a person's life, from a mother's sari where, jula and everything, what you're saying. And right now, at what stage is it? So, how do you see that essence of tradition to continue?
See, tradition, I believe, is not fixed. Okay, there are certain things that we've come down now. We say these broad border korwai saris or something like that, the ikat. That will be the mainstream, it will continue. But I don't think anything tradition means it's going to box you into one thing. Now, what I've done is also tradition. Now, if it is another 50 years, this will become an antique, it will become a tradition. The person now, I have every generation believing this is the original if they haven't seen the ikat. So, tradition will not hold you back. Okay, tradition allows you that change, allows you, and I think change is the only constant. I think if we are not rigid that we say this is the only way, nothing can be the only way. As I say, if we can keep the culture of the textile alive, I think we've done our part. It's not possible to say don't change. Of course, I have a major issue with now Surat coming and flooding things, and I've been involved in a lot of, actually, I'm fighting a lot on policy issues. So, but that is where I believe the government should have come in stronger. And I've been involved before with a lot of government agencies and things like that. But, the thing is, you make such complex rules that the weaver can't access it. And because he doesn't know what he's signing on, he is not aware of it. Also, I think, we should also be educated as Indian citizens about what is our heritage. But for that, we have enough 100 brands. We have the handloom brand, craft brand, silk brand, this, that. So everything is done. But is it being penalized if you don't follow? That's a question mark. It's not. Now you have 100 exhibitions that say handloom. Most of the saris are not handloom. But do they have, I always say, just put a machine there that authenticates handloom, this, that, nothing. But if we are not able to take it fully down that line and say that and penalize them, it's a tragedy. Now, what is sold in Chickpet, one of my weavers, see, when we industrialized in Bangalore, all the handloom weavers in Chickpet were asked to move out. So they went to Kotgiri, Yelahanka, and wherever else, Bannerghatta. But the weavers continued with their power loom. But now they have stopped doing it in Chickpet area so much because they say Surat has flooded the market at such unbelievable prices, they can't compete. So, I think it's also a responsibility of the government policy to say, how is it that we allow? We've got our handloom brand. We've got that Handloom Reservation Act. It is all on paper. It's never continued. What's the use? All our rules are great on paper. Implementation is not there. You're not supposed to make saris in power loom, towels, and lungis. Only 3 things. They can make everything in power looms, but do we go and penalize them? No, we don't penalize. We've allowed them just to flourish. And that also has built up a big community who would buy power loom because it suits their pocket. So who's at fault? I think, see, handloom, why are we allowing this polyester power looms and then crying, saying, my future is gone? So we are responsible, but I don't think we are making a noise enough, or the government doesn't think, they need that support of of people to be able to say, I will resist that. But that is a difficult line to draw because it's an individual thing. It's your choice, no? How do I impose all these? It's very difficult at that point, but most of the weavers' sons are not continuing. See, another wrong perception, we expect a weaver's son to sit shirtless and at the loom. He doesn't. He's done MBA engineering, and my weaver's son. They work outside and come back and take the business to supply the rest of India. You don't expect him to be sitting. But since he's grown up there as a child, he knows every aspect, like you say. You've seen it right through, you will understand it. So when you say, take on a business, you will understand it. And there's been a lot of integrity, at least I can say from my end. In all these years, I've not had weavers cheat me. If anyone has cheated us in 50 years, the other weaver says, how can you do that to Amma? And recover it. So there's a lot on trust, as I said, good human values, which you otherwise people say that doesn't exist, this doesn't exist, be suspicious. People, the weavers are God-fearing people, and they've very think that that is their duty, they will do it. And they are very kind people, if you ever go into any weaver's house, whatever they have, they will share. However poor they are, they will share. And it's sometimes I ask, why are you doing this? Like I did a work in Rajasthan. Sorry, I'm just digressing. So I introduced Gotapati into Khadi in a place, Dausa. So they said, how can you? I said, I need an identity for Rajasthan, and it was a novelty. I asked this man, you're paid so low, why are you doing it in my broken Hindi? He says, but what face will I show to my ancestor? We've been doing it for 3 generations. So I, in my broken Hindi and English, am blasting him and telling him, think of your life, not about your ancestor. I mean, this kind of income is so little, how will you live? But he says, how can I just cut this line? See, this is the kind of conflict they have, I mean, first time someone said, my ancestor, how will I show my face? These are kind of weird stories I've had right across my years of why they want to hold on to. But it gives them also a sense of satisfaction. You're not under a stress. You're not sitting like on the computer all the time. You live with your family, and all the pre-loom work is done by women. We talk of gender equality, it's only women. If the women didn't do pre-loom, the man can't weave. So you're forced to have those kind of relationship and continue it also. And then living in a village, you have that social standing. Sorry.
I've had the good fortune of being at Pavitra's museum, and I would say, while people say, oh, there's nothing much in Bangalore, you should certainly visit her place, and it's a delight to, even go through the motifs and all that. Pavitra, you should talk about it, because I saw some beautiful saris with the cart, the squirrel, the plane, and I'm like, how did people even imagine to do these things? And she actually mentioned that you should just look around and find inspiration, like how we do for our writing and poetry and everything. So I think that should be on all our checklists to even nudge people to get there. My question is, Pavitra, more from the policy angle, right? I'm in that space, and I know what that struggle could look like. But I also believe the Samaj Sarkar Bazaar, right? The market, the society, and the government should play out in a way that all of us see value, and I think also the incentive of being there, right? I mean, as much as I'm a huge enthusiast of handloom and I try my best in a personal capacity to do so, I feel the price point at times makes it feel a little elite. And I have the same opinion with education and alternate schools or anything we believe that should be so. I feel as much as we're saying it's for the common people, the pricing seems a little lavish there. So I don't have too much of an insight to it. So I thought it'll be nice to hear from you.
Okay, one is, let me start with your motive. Okay, in the museum, we have interesting things about different motives. We have a car, a biplane that was in the 1920s, 1930s. And the detailing in the car is unbelievable. We have squirrels. We have the rosewater sprinkler that everyone believes is a paisley. We have different things. Recently, I was just telling her, I had 2 storks dancing, and a little bit of nest. It's so cute. It was just unbelievable to see these kind of things that have come. So, I mean, every weaver is a creative person who's been allowed that space. Today, he's not allowed because he has to produce those 550 saris, 100 saris. So there's no space for him to do his own thing. He has to just follow. And also, I think, we have gramophones. So it's about knowledge sharing, motives.
is about knowledge sharing. And in India, I think we are lucky we don't wait for a muse to come out with a beautiful painting or something. The mat, is enough to create it. The matchstick, the tea putty, all these are enough to create design elements. There's no one great thing saying, oh, I need the perfect sunset or I need the perfect figure to have this. That being said about motor. But about the policy, again, this is a major issue for me. And it's at the core of what I do because right now I think I've given up fighting with the government, but I'm there on a lot of think tanks on this. Because the issue is the government is not looking at controlling silk prices. Okay, silk prices are shooting through the roof. Okay, and so prices, if you want pure silk, you have to pay a price. I mean, I'm ashamed sometimes when I look at the price because I do not know how to say anything. But then this is, if you're paying for some eatable or some exotic thing at a restaurant, it takes the same kind of thing because this is the cost of the raw material one. Now, when we talk of wages that should be fair enough, I think it's necessary for us to also see that his wages are fair. I hopefully, at least with my weavers, they're very open. See, they take me to the looms. I don't own one loom. I don't own anything at all. But they will take me to see what is happening, everything. They're not worried that I'm going to take away the weaver or the guy and things like that. But again, so the wages and raw material are there. So you can, in Kanchipuram, a weaver making a big sari can earn 45,000. Okay, the minimum easily. To the smallest person in some small village in Karnataka, not even earning 100 rupees. So that's the disparity. Now, how do you bring everyone into it? Or is there a structure that we control everything? I do not think it's possible to control because, again, in a democracy and that independence is there. But in a way, I always say we should have some non-formal education to be able to get them to understand what are their rights, what is it. So in Delhi, they always write me off and say, you're an accident, you're a fluke. If all my weavers can buy me out, they say there's a mistake. I say, if we write a letter and say the wages are too low, oh, you're spoiling them. These are the kind of things that come. A man who doesn't know what is written as the amount that is going into his bank depends on his son. The son is a signatory. They take the money. How is he to know what he's getting? So that is one part of it. But on the other consumer level, we have enough material. So see, I have not worked so much with, not used polyester as far as possible. I have done some things when weavers have changed over. But I have worked a lot on waste silk and yarns and things like this. An alternative, as I told you, this weaver of mine, banana, vetiver, any kind of fiber. So it is, I think it's a mind shift for us also. We do not need to have that heavy sari. And today with the gold price, you can't have pure gold. So are you willing to make a shift in your mind that you would wear a thinner silk with less quality of gold, or maybe not that? So I use a lot of khaki color to make it look like gold, because sometimes it's very difficult and I don't control all this. So these are kind of issues that have happened. But I think if we have to maintain a level of growth economically, financially for the maker, that is the weaver, I think now we are bound to pay a higher price, because if we can pay for Italian shoes, the highest price, why is it that we can't respect our own Indian artisan? I think it's more to do with us. We can't blame everything on the government. But when we do it, you see, that's what I've been fighting. From the time of independence, we have this 20% discount. Now, a person like you or me doesn't need that 20%. But as a matter of right, the minute we see a man who's not very savvy with English, wearing a pant and shirt, we will bargain and bargain, because the government says you have to give 20% discount. Now, there is no need for that. That can be reverted back to the weaver. The consumer who's buying in multinationals doesn't need that 20%. Yet, we think it's our right, but we've never protested. No, how many of us have said, don't give us 20% discount? Would we? We don't like it. So actually, I think if we take, the responsibility is a lot to do with people also. See, if I say no, I always say don't take it, no. And I mean, I always feel upset that you're bargaining with someone from your own country, claiming to be patriotic, claiming to be Indian, yet bargaining and going to Italy and buying those shoes or buying all those machine-made things from all these branded stores. So it reflects on you. Policy definitely needs to change, but for that we need to make it a little inclusive for taking the grassroots people to be able to tell us what they also want. In all these so-called committees, they are never there. We're sitting in the air-conditioned offices and making decisions. So, I mean, I think keeping them out of it, it's not possible for me to dictate what is best for your life without you being part of it. I don't know if I'm right.
But an extension to that is now the project is hard to establish, right? Like, as much as I know people who call handloom stuff as flawed pieces because there is something that's on it, for me, it's something that I would love to have, right? So that's what makes it different. But there is Kosha, Vijay. Yeah. So they have come up with this small gadget that goes onto the loom, developed by a very dear friend called Vijay Krishnappa, and it's attached to the loom.
It's attached to the loom, so you'll know where it's made and if it is handloom and what are all going into it. So it authenticates the fact that the sari is made by a handloom in a certain place with all that. But it is fabulous about it. But you know how many, it's a great thing, and he's got a patent recently, it's brilliant. Again, is the number in our country is so huge. How do we reach out? You know, these are little pockets that are great, but we need something to be able to work on a mass also. And that mass is very difficult to do even with all the best intention like Kosha. How do we reach a mass? By the time we reach a mass, half the weavers have left weaving and moved on to something. They've moved on from handloom into power loom. And that is the tragedy of it, you know. They've moved on into power loom because they think they'll get more production. But then you have the electric short, our electricity goes off. When the electricity stops, that machine stops. So when the machine stops, the power loom weaving, you'll have a line, a flaw. That becomes a disadvantage because it's a defect. So the man buying it will say, give me a discount because it's a defect. So it's actually a whole cycle somewhere. It's not just about one thing, you know. So actually there was one brilliant weaver we had who made things in Anikal, which Bangalore was known for. And he moved on, he got a national award. I said, what am I in paper what am I doing with keeping this national award? It's not paying me anything. He refused to teach his children anything more. So again, it is, how is the impact? And we had indigo dyeing here. We did it. We got it from Raichur. Now, if I say that, people say, are you making it up? What do you say? But that is the loss, you know. And since our numbers are so huge, we have to think of something where they are engaged, and it has to be inclusive for them to understand it easily. You know, otherwise we're just churning out hundreds of the same design. And all the corporates are there. And policy like now KVIC is under the government. So a man who's done khadi for donkey's years can't use the word khadi. I too got a notice because I did khadi. But the thing is, why not? Why? How can you take ownership of something which was started much before KVIC, much before Gandhi? I was telling you about this lady called Ittige Bhima Vike. She went, that was in the 80s. She insisted every woman spins. So you don't waste time, you make yarn. So your husband can weave or the neighbor can weave. So this kind of self-sufficiency was always, always there. But when we make these rules, we are cutting off a lot of people, no? And every corporate is in handlooms. There is money in handlooms, there's no doubt. Otherwise, you won't have every corporate in it.
Just talking about the value and the price and everything. See, we were always taught, you know, in my childhood, that when a sari comes from a weaver, it's a poetry, 6 yards of poetry. Never add profit margin into it. Open each sari, see it, look at it, and then price it. So it's about the value that you perceive out of it.
But that was a different
What,
time.
no, no, I'm just telling you one part of it. Second part of it, when we're talking about these traditions in art, when we are looking, when we're hunting something, the cost comes in. I mean, look at the sari that you're wearing. Look at the sari she's wearing. There's no price for it. It's the way you carrying it. So it doesn't fall which price band it falls, what material it is made. I feel that is where the
You can't try telling it for all the people who buy saris just on a whim. You would do it at a personal level. Can you implement it? No. And that is a challenge, and it's not possible living in a country here like this. It's not possible. So I think it's just that we need sensitivity when we make rules, and we need absolute integrity when we implement it. That is sort of missing, and that is where these people are caught in the in-between space. And I don't know why we've got such fabulous rules, but we keep changing line by line, one sentence at a time. So the impact of the change never hits you also. It's slowly changed. So
Thank you for the talk, ma'am. It was really enlightening. I think my question is overlapping with a lot of the other questions. I've often wondered about consumer responsibility. Like you said, it's upon us. But I've been traveling. I went to Maheshwar. Last year, I went to Maheshwar, Banaras, and looking at like power loom versions of handloom saris, right? And when you ask the weavers, it's half the cost.
at first.
And it looks the same. For somebody who doesn't know, like you said, we are not educated enough to. A lot of handlooms are very easily recreatable in power loom. Some like ikat probably shows up as power loom, but many don't. So what is the solution? Because a lot of consumers, like I speak to many people who believe anything is silk. They don't even know. Somebody told me, a relative of mine told me that, oh, you can't buy silk in India under 1 lakh. You can't buy a silk sari under 1 lakh of rupees. And I was like, how do people believe this, right? So, because everything is called silk now, everything is called cotton.
But then at that point, 1 minute to stop you. So I've been on a lot of all these things. I always said, why is it that we don't pull up Amazon? They sell silk sari for 1,600. And Central Silk Board, everyone was, he said, why aren't you taking action against them? You don't take action against the big corporates, but you will catch the small-time weaver and catch him. And if he's taken, God forbid, a loan that he can't pay even below 10,000, they hang his protest photos all over, they have suicide. Suicide rates are the highest between farmers and weavers. Aren't we sensitive to such things? No. And we let Mehul Choksky get away. And here, for within 6,000, he's committing suicide. And that is our tragedy. Sorry.
Yes. I think my question is, what is the role of how do we kind of educate the consumer, right? Because for any lay person going to, say, a place like Banaras, if I can buy the same sari, it looks exactly the same for 5,000 when the original is like 20,000. Maybe like 7 out of 10 people would make that decision. So that is the first part of my question. And one more thing, this conflict between like the newer generation not wanting to sit at the handloom, which is very fair because it doesn't pay. So how do we see these skills being, how do we conserve these skills in a way?
Okay, to answer your first question about duplication of things, okay. Varanasi is a big center, it is under the Prime Minister. Yet it is flooded with make-believes, okay? To get a pure silk is difficult. If you can't implement it with all the powers that be, how are you hoping to do it in the rest of the country? It's a simple question I ask. See, they're not supposed to be doing it. And then we have the GI. Also not necessary, there is a GI for all this, yet you allow them to do the same thing in Paolo. So it defeats the whole purpose. We are spending money left, right, and center on creating all this. Can't be implemented. Like everyone, that's what I was saying, even in Ilkal, you've got a GI for Ilkal, yet its power looms are there allowed. So what is the whole purpose of it? It is, do we tick the box saying I've done this, done this, done this, or is it really meant to really preserve the craft and the art? The other thing is, of course, technology grows so fast, so it's impossible for everyone to know. Earlier, when we used to know handloom, the pin marks would be there. But now they've perfected it so beautifully, you cannot even make out. I mean, earlier we would know burnt silk, we would know. Now you have to take it to a lab because, I mean, that's how fast things are and they're so smart. But I think responsibility is not just with our consumer, it's the responsibility of the state also to check how are we allowing it. Is it taking away so many livelihoods? Is it taking away so much income? If it takes away so much income, naturally you would rather the weaver's son will go and be a watchman somewhere or a waiter. He doesn't like the job, but there is no alternative, no? So if there is alternative, that's what I say. I think my journey, I think, is a great way to say, okay, give that design free. Now, if you created 100, what do you lose? Everyone thinks something's wrong with me. And they say I'm setting a wrong precedent in the designer community. I said, give it what I have given it. It has only come back to me tenfold. But it has also impacted so many people. And if you have that capacity, what do you lose? Anyway, everyone's going to copy it at some point of time. So how does it matter? Instead of having some ugly things that are coming out. The other, when you said about doing the identical thing, that is again, it is totally up to the state. If they did want to really promote handloom, they would have stopped all this. You know, besides power loom, taking electricity, polyester going into the landfills, all this is going to go on in an endless journey. I don't know where to say. I think at our point, we just have to be as responsible or try and buy from authentic places as much as we know. But it's very difficult, you know. Or I say we don't need to be buying every day a piece or saying I own 20 beautiful pieces worth 1 lakh each. I think we need to relook at our own priorities. What is our things? What is more important? I think it is, I mean, we can't preach it to the rest of the world, but if each of us looks within and say that how much do I need? How much is important? What it is? And do I need to keep this legacy on? I cannot afford to lose this legacy after thousands of years. So what do I do to contribute to it? Maybe even if you buy that one sari a year, it's fine. You've got so many other 15 saris from previous years, and you've got other modes of clothes to wear. So it's not like the sari was the only way and only garment. No, today you have choices of other things. Just see that it's handloom. So, but choices of material, as I say, I've done a lot of work with waste silk thing, and you just have to play around and get the drape. You know, so I've done a lot of things with it, put it out. Maybe I've not been able to push it. There is a lot of possibility. In fact, right now what I'm doing, I've done a lot of work with the pastoral community, the Kambli. So for that, what I did is I used recycled yarn. That has been chosen now to go to Santa Fe. So it's a question of it's too rough. So you just have to use your creativity, you know, to create a new piece which will also have an impact. And today the same man, my Kambli man, has been given 20 looms and 20 charkas because of what we did, you know. So, I mean, when you see them progress, it's my progress.
Pavitra, thank you so much for that talk. I was just saying, I mean, relating to your question, that's something I've struggled with. I've always been a lover of handlooms, and I have a lot of friends who have kind of grown up with me, but still we have those arguments of like what you were saying, that I can get the same thing. My only argument with them or my repartee to them is that one is be aware of what you're wearing. Buying something from a power loom or buying a silk in inverted commas, at 1,800 or 2,000 is your choice. But you should know that you're not wearing silk. So don't have an argument with somebody who says, I bought a Banaras which is a true pure piece for 20 or 25,000. and compare it with something that you bought at 4,000. Be aware that you're not wearing a Banaras silk, so don't doubt it to be that. I think more and more sessions like this with a younger crowd joining in, where there's education and awareness, I think that's the only way to change coming generations. So thank you for what you do. And Karishma, thank you for organizing sessions like this. I think education is the only way forward.
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to make a quick comment. Everything starts with me, okay? Everything, the whole world, everything starts with me. Right now, I made a conscious, and I have started to consciously think about every purchase. I don't want any synthetic handbag. I love the hand-woven water lily because it represents so many things. It represents what I value and what I want to show the world that they should also be valuing. Buying khadi, everybody is correctly, we all agree that it's better to buy one khadi item than 20 of those cheap. I have so many cheap Chinese things in my cupboard and I'm trying to get rid of it very hard. But it is value, it's what you attached. So if every one of us makes a choice to wear one khadi item a week, just one handloom item per week, and wear it with pride and wear it in a way that people come up to you and say, where did you get it? And, and the conversation starts. So let's start with me, with us.
See, as I said, I don't think I have much of a commercial brain, but it's just happened. But I have taught in all the places. Actually, I've done a lot of training programs, especially in the rural areas. So I've taught linen, a lot of linen, tablecloth, bedspreads, this, that. Then KGF, when the mines had closed and the senior guys above 45 couldn't come to Bangalore, we made bedspreads there. So I've been able to teach. Then in Adakmaranahalli, I used a lot of waste. In small villages, I have taught things that are not saris. And in fact, what I'm taking right now when I go to the US is rugs that is all out of waste. Wool, again, it's different. See, what you do with that fabric, whether you make it into a garment, is totally up to you. I will do the structure, the drape, everything I can do. And I can get people also who will listen to me, because they've seen success. They blindly say, okay. In fact, the beautiful thing is I've had one man called, his name is ASS, so I used to say AS. Okay, and his father came to us, not a great weaver, but this guy had a direction that I want to do something with my life. So he meticulously come with his little book, write everything and go back. And then he'll say, are you sure this will come out well? Yes. He'll go back and he says, God help you, I don't think this is going to succeed. Then he'll go back to the village and he says, I'm sitting in the temple and praying for Muruga to save you. I say, why? Those days we didn't have this instant phone business. I mean, he had to call, but it wasn't so easy. So then I said, no, it doesn't matter. You pray for me, for Muruga, but you do it as it is. Then after 1 week, he'll say, Akani, super. So it's come out so beautifully. Today, he's brilliantly successful. He's named his daughter Pavitra after me. I've got quite a few Pavitras. But the joke of it is, now he says, I've achieved enough. I'm just so fed up of seeing what is market-driven. And he's back to me. He says, I don't care. You have to give me, at least for 2 looms, you have to give me design constantly. I need to charge up my brain. I need some kind of a challenge. I'm not getting a challenge from the market. And that is a different aspect of looking at it. Here, he's very successful. Other things can run, but what about me? Nothing is interesting me now. I will churn out and sell. But I'm working with him and doing beautifully great work. But, there are kind of people, they're just not driven. They've achieved everything, put aside for their family, daughter, son, everything else. But I think that human element of creativity, that individual passion, something, I think all of us have it in whichever medium you look at it. So now it's nice to see that is driving him,
Right now, no shirts.
No?
Shirts.
No, I did lungis. We did lungis at one time. I said, it's possible, I mean, because I don't pre-plan anything I design. I don't want to get into stitched garments and all.
Hi, ma'am. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and your journey into textiles all these years. I just wanted to contribute and point out an observation that I'd seen over the years. I a lot of these, like how you said that story of a sari is endless and it just keeps changing and evolving as time passes. So my mom used to tell me that in the olden times, I'm from Assam, and my mom used to tell me that when a baby is born, so the nappy that used to be stitched used to be the fabric which was used by the
Grandmother.
like the chadar
Always.
or fabric from dhotis from grandfathers. But those practices are not, in practice anymore, because again, with time, our grandfathers have changed. Their dhotis have transformed into pants. So there are no dhotis anymore in vision to be transformed into nappies. So I think it used to be a conscious choice, or maybe the lack of infrastructure or clothing probably, which used to lead to people making alternative choices and seeing further more than what the fabric could be. But today, with more options available, there is lack of trust.
Yeah, but that is also mass consumerism, and the production is there. You'll have everything repackaged and told to you in a different way. I think all these are conscious decisions that one makes. But now you get nappies with cloth also. So you can't take away what is happening, but I think as a conscious individual, you could make that difference.
Like you said, you make conscious decisions. Like for a person who does not have, like say my mother does not wear saris for whatever her reasons are, that knowledge transfer is not happened to me. Like how to pick a sari or how to pick a fabric. Forget saris, any fabric. That knowledge transfer didn't happen from my grandmother to my mother or grandfather to my father or whatever. So I don't have a starting point for this. It is self-learned. So what are tips or starting points for a person who does not have that knowledge transfer happening? How do I learn to identify a handloom fabric? How do I, or who do I go to, or what books or what resources can I refer to understand better and to make better decisions?
It's difficult to answer that, but what I can tell you is, wherever you or your friends or anything, I think you can just touch and feel. The first thing is touch and feel. You'll feel the difference slowly, that sensitivity will develop. And I think, again, books and exposure, there are 100 exhibitions happening, a lot of things. I think if you move into that space where people are exhibiting, showing, things like that, that'll pique your interest also, and there are a lot of things happening in Bangalore. Everything may not be authentic, but then I think just to get the general feel and I think of it, I think to start with, you have a lot of exhibitions. Go there, go see. And slowly, if something interests you, then start reading up or get more involved in it. It's not only because it's not there in your family. Maybe your extended family, somebody will be there. So ask some stories or your friends or something, friend's mother, grandmother. See, there are 100 sources that you could get here. If you see whichever way, whether it is a chadar in a mosque or a sari in a temple, if you really look at it, there will be always cloth that is there in any religious thing also. I think there's no lack of it. Or I think at every museum, folk art, anything, fabric is the basis of almost anything.
Ma'am, I had a couple of questions. One was, in fact, Priya and I were discussing this morning about this issue. A lot of us are not in professions where we have any sort of relationship with people that we're dealing with. We work in silos, like you mentioned, on a computer all day and things. But your profession, the essence of it is to build relationships with weavers. But it is your profession, and as well as something that you're personally sort of vested and invested in. But is there a need for that separation, or how does one today, if I were to look at a profession like this, how am I to navigate both worlds? Because a lot of us are told keep profession as very separate from your personal sort of mindset, even.
I don't know. I don't seem to agree because I think any work, if you don't have joy, then it doesn't become, it just continues to be work. How does it fulfill you as a person? I mean, I'm talking personally. It has to fulfill you something about your work. Why are you doing something? Because obviously you enjoy. I don't think we can compartmentalize totally because as human beings, everything overlaps and mixes with everything. No, you cannot separate it totally. So I would say that today we are at a point we're lucky also because there are hundreds of design schools that are mushrooming. And there's a lot of people, all these kids are churned out from all these schools. Out of them, so many of them are interested in taking it forward. So I think all this is also depends on the self. What is it that you want to push? You don't know as a youngster where you will be 20 years. But if you have some interest, some inclination, some direction, I think the world is big enough to follow it. Everything doesn't need to have so much of investment in it, especially textiles do not need investment, but interest, passion, something that drives you, then you will follow it. No, like why have you come today? Because you're interested. It's just a personal thing. You start at your personal level, something else, you'll find all those things coming together.
Also, I'd like you to talk about how you personally got involved in developing a museum. What was the need and the drive to develop it, and how did you actually physically go about doing that?
A lot of people say I'm a mad person, but anyway, instead of opening 10 shops, I've got one shop for 50 years, not advertised. But I always wanted to open a museum because then asking for land, asking for permissions, it was just an endless journey. And I was thinking my life is going by me. By the time I finish anything, it will be rather late. Because every time I trained a weaver, we would always show him an antique textile or something. I wanted to build that pride and confidence. That came by showing an old textile, saying you've inherited, if not the same piece, something, you belong to a community that has got this knowledge. So first step was always building that level that they've inherited something. How do we use it? So then that along with saying, I will buy back, I will pay, added that value. But for a museum, I said, everyone who has succeeded has been involved in seeing something old. And another thing that got me really was every museum says 18th century, 17th century, some Raja, some king, all with a person who had money, clout, everything. I said, what about my grandmother? They didn't have money, but yet she decided what she wanted to wear, how she did her hair, how she did whatever. And I realized women who were not part of royalty also, they contributed to our textile legacy without being in your face, because every woman had that. And buying a sari, ordering a sari was a huge thing if you talk of 2 generations earlier. They wanted a particular color, a particular design, and weavers were everywhere. So you just told them to produce it. So I think that is another reason I said, why are we left out of the whole museum scene? Everywhere it is about a king in certain period. And he had the resources. So he could make the most exotic. A person without the resources but still wanting to celebrate her personality in her own dress, in her own way that she thought. I thought we needed a place to show that. Another thing is it brings back memories. So everyone who's given me a sari is named after the lady who's worn it. It's a Kamla sari. Then the people who come as guests say, oh God, I remember my aunt, I remember my atte. There is always a recall when you see that. So it brings back memory, and I think I felt we were left out of the whole museum scene, only focusing on the most exotic textiles, because everyone couldn't afford only exotic textiles, no? So I think that is when it was necessary. I said, I'll do it. Then instead of asking anyone, I was renting up my upstairs house. I just converted. I said, even if it's small, it's okay. But It's been tremendous. I'm very humbled to say most of it, other than our collection, has been donated by people. So everyone has given me their old saris when it's coming apart, can't wear. Here, Beena's given me 3 beautiful saris, things like that. So instead of keeping these saris, not using it, at least it gives me an opportunity to study. Then I have all the weavers who come for these craft exhibitions or textile exhibitions, they're sent there. So they can sit down, draw, figure out, ask. And so I think for them it's a great excitement, and most people enjoy it. And we've documented from measuring terminology to everything, so hopefully it goes.
Like she said that she doesn't have a precedent. So I would like to add, like my mom, she has been wearing sari since she was 13 years old. And I come from a very small town in Bihar. So she spent almost all her life in the village and the small town. And she always wears cotton saris every single day. And because of the weather, she always wears Kota cottons. But it is just last 2 years before I got her a Kota's cotton and Kota silk. Then she realized what is actually Kota cotton and Kota silk. So it's not just that the information will flow from her to me. So I would just say that you read, and whenever you buy anything, you ask questions.
Correct.
Because 2 questions answered, they can tell anything. By the time you are on your 5th question or 5th person, you will understand what is going on. So you have to ask questions because you are paying your hard-earned money to get it.
Absolutely.
So before buying, you just ask questions, and rather than going and after listening to this and changing all your wardrobe, you use what you have and you to give time to learn about things before, like buying things. That's like my takeaway.
Hi, ma'am. Thank you for your interesting talk. I have not even planned to come here. I just came because my daughter asked me to come. She's into designing, so I just thought I will put my brain after a long number of years, sit and hear to somebody. It was really nice to hear you.
Thank you.
My experience is I am not into much of saris. I don't know, unfortunately, because I feel like I have to wear it. I don't know whether I will carry it properly. Only during marriage time I have my saris, and then that's it there in the wardrobe. But I've seen my mother-in-law. She's into saris like anything. She used to be. And Gadwal, Pochampalli, there used to be a person coming in, sitting, and she used to check each sari.
Correct.
And she used to be very precise about what sari she's wearing. And every day she used to wear Gadwal. After her round of house shows, she will change the sari and set it properly and sit down. That's how I used to know how saris are important. So what is the advice you can give for the future? Like I myself, I'm not into this much. What about my daughter? What is going to happen for this kind of industry? I've seen that stop at my mother-in-law's face. What about me? I'm not so much.
See, the question.
Now I feel like
But if your daughter has been interested to come here, she's interested in the subject. Okay, if she has made you come here, I think you can be rest assured. No, you can be rest assured that she will take it up later. See, it's not only about saris, as I said, she will use it differently, she will dress it differently. It's fine, As long as you have that understanding and respect, I think you're in the right track. There is no right and wrong and do and don't. So if she is as a youngster, she has skipped you and thought that she is enjoying handlooms, see, we are in good hands. That way, just trust your instincts, trust that generation, and it will come. That's it. Thanks.